There are a couple other issues with the Diels-Alder reaction. The first is that the diene can have carbon groups on it or other groups on it. They generally are either carbon or oxygen groups. They generally have to be electron donating groups. And we're going to talk about those again in chapter 17. But basically right now, just imagine they have carbons or oxygens. So you could have an oxygen group of methoxide here, you could have a carbon group there, but you'll see that basically one or the other. What we're going to look at as a situation where we have exactly one attached to the diene, and in that case it could either be on the carbon 1 of the diene system or it could be on carbon 2 of the diene system. If we then imagine bringing over our dienophile and starting to connect bonds, so like here to there, here to there, the dienophile itself can be flipped over vertically 180 degrees. And so the diene could either line up this way with the E group on the upper carbon or this way with the E group on the lower carbon. If we then take each of those, create a pseudobenzene, shift the electrons around, and draw products, the alignment A would create a product that looks like this. Alignment B would create a product that looks like that. This carbon is that carbon. This carbon is that carbon. You can see they became connected. Okay, now we look at our 6-membered ring. So now what we've done is we've created a 6-membered ring that has a methyl substituent here, and then one carbon away, the electron group E substituent. So again, in relative numbering terms, we could say that starting with 1 as a point of reference, saying if that were 1, then this would be carbon 2. We have groups on carbons 1 and 2 related to each other. We say these groups are ortho-related. That's a synonym for 1 and 2 that we're going to talk about more in chapter 16. If we did orientation B, what we would see is what will become sort of carbon 1 of our counting would be here. It would attach there. The E group would be 2 away. So we would have a 1, 2, 3 relative positioning of those groups. We call that meta. Very quickly looking over here, we have a similar kind of thing. We could attach the E group. We'd have the E group oriented up. So we would attach there. We would have a 1-3 relationship between the methoxy and the E group. Or we could have it rotated this way, where we'd have a 1-4 relationship. 1-4 is called para. There is actually a rule about which is preferred. As you can see from my circles, either the ortho or the para is preferred here. What I generally like to say is it's even easier to say not meta. So in other words, no matter where our substituent on our diene is attached, relative to our electron withdrawing group, it will prefer to not be meta. It will prefer to be either ortho, depending on what we have, or para. We also have a stereochemistry issue. This is more complicated to explain. I have some pretty cringy, ugly drawings coming up. But basically, there are several different issues in stereochemistry. The first one is that the dienophile itself is a double bond. It can have substituents on both carbons of the double bond. Those substituents could either be cis or trans on the dienophile double bond. So you see this is U-shaped, that's cis. This is Z-shaped, that's trans. When that happens, those are going to form either dashes or wedges on the 6-membered ring, these groups that are hanging off. If those two groups are cis, then they're going to form either both dashes or both wedges. Later on, you're going to see that I have sort of a system for predicting the stereochemistry. In that case, we're going to draw them with dashes always, if these are the E groups. In contrast, if they are trans, then they're going to go on trans to the ring, which means one will be on a dash, one will be on a wedge. And again, we're going to have to account for that when we look at how to put these rings together. We can only tell, well, I'm sorry, not in this case. In this case, we can clearly tell the difference between cis and trans regardless of the structure of the diene. The more complicated thing comes when we look at the way that the diene and the dienophile approach each other. And I apologize for these ugly drawings. It's really helpful if you build models, but this is just at least an attempt to kind of show you how this works out. So see if you can kind of see this, see if you can build models. When we talk about this next week, I will put some models together and I will try to further explain this, but I will readily admit it's very hard to see. Okay, so it turns out although we draw the Diels-Alder reaction as if the diene was flat in the plane, the dienophile is flat in the same plane, and they come up sliding across the plane side to side together, that's not actually how they react. Instead, what actually happens is they stack on top of each other. So as I've drawn it here, I have the diene on top, I have the dienophile on the bottom. They stack up, the two end carbons of the diene system line up with the two pi carbons of the dienophile system, and our new bond is basically formed sort of straight down from the diene into the dienophile on those two things. Now the way that I've come up with representing this in 3 dimensions is a little bit ugly, but if you sketch it a little bit, you may begin to kind of see what I'm driving at. What I do is I draw a cube in 3 dimensions. So like I have these hidden bonds and everything, right? And what I do is I put the 4 carbons of the diene on the top face of the cube, on each of the corners. Now that's not really perfectly accurate bond angles. We know that these are going to be a little wider because they're 120, but the cube has 90, right? This square on top has 90. But for our purposes, just showing how they align, it works. Then what I do is I put the dienophile pi carbons on the 2 carbons of the side that's directly below the opening of the dienophile above it. Then what I do is I sort of sketch, in a way, the other groups attached. Now we know when we have an alkene like this, this carbon is trigonal planar, so we're going to have, if this is a sort of a semi-elongated side view, we're going to have one coming off 120 degrees this way, one 120 degrees that way. And we know that we're going to be dropping a bond directly in between those. So that's going to actually end up forming a ring, and one of these is going to be pointing out on the ring, and one of these is going to be pointing in under the fold of this ring, under where the diene was. It should also be noted that on the end of this, and I'll try to show you this again, and we'll show this in problem solving also, the hydrogens that I have drawn here just represent the 2 groups on the end of the diene. They're at 120 degree angles. One of them points out of the U, and one of them points in toward the center of the U, in toward the other carbon of the diene. So I call that an outer group and an inner group. When we then make our double bond, when we make our bonds, we make a sigma bond here. So see, now there's a line from this carbon down to that carbon. We make a sigma bond here. It's just a line here, right? And then we make a double bond here on the end. So this is where it gets a little scary ugly. You're going to have to kind of build some models. If we put the diene in the same location, and then imagine the dienophile being underneath it, the dienophile can flip over 180 degrees. When it does that, if we have the E group here on this bond underneath the diene, we flip it over 100 degrees, it's going to move to that location, which is now sticking out away from the U of the diene. So see, it's here under the U, here it's outside away from the U. We, organic chemists, have come up with a term to describe these two relative orientations. We say in this case, the E group is endo, it's inside. That's what endo means, right? Exo means it's outside. So we can have either endo approach or exo approach. The significance of endo versus exo is in the relationship between this E group and any group that is attached on the end of the diene. So if you look on this diene, we have a methyl group. It's on an outer bond. When we make this ring and then flatten it out, that group is going to end up on a dash. I'm going to show you that later, okay? When this E group is endo, it will also end up on a dash. So in the endo isomer, we're going to get this diastereomer, this relative cis and trans, both cis, both on dashes. In contrast, if we do the same thing but we do the exo, now if the E group was on a dash here, it should be on a wedge here, and that's what we see. The methyl's still on a dash, but the E group is on a wedge. Now we have the trans. So these two are diastereomers. It turns out that when we do this, the endo product is preferred over a wide variety of potential reactants. So there's a theory about why that's the case. And the theory comes from the orbital theory. If we have these pi bonds arranged like this, then what we really have is these pi type p orbitals all lined up perpendicular, right? Here and here. And we're actually making a bond by overlapping this p orbital lobe with that p orbital lobe of the pi bond and this here. And so we overlap these two, the pi bonds are gone all here because they become single bonds, and then we get a double bond there, see? Pi bond. Well, it turns out in that process, since our E group almost always has a pi orbital directly adjacent here, that pi orbital is going to line up with this one, and it's going to be able to kind of come up and sort of interact with this pi orbital of the diene. Not the one on the end that's making the bond, but the one of the two in the middle. We call this secondary orbital overlap, and when we do calculations with molecular orbitals, we see that that slightly lowers the potential energy of the transition state, making this a faster reactant, kinetically preferred, and therefore the preferred product. When we have the E group in the exo position, you can see that now it's sticking out far away from these inner carbons of the diene. There's no possibility for secondary overlap, and so therefore this has a slightly higher energy transition state, it reacts just a little bit slower, and therefore it is not preferred. The other thing that you need to know about the Diels-Alder reaction, and this is actually a terrible picture of it, but when we do this face-to-face approach, if we go back up to my cube drawings, I drew a cube where the diene was on the top face, the dienophile was on the bottom edge. I could have just as easily drawn a cube where the diene was on the bottom face, it'd be a little more crowded looking, and then the dienophile was on the top edge. I may try that sometime, maybe that works better. But at any rate, the point is that there is nothing to prefer one direction of approach from another. So as a result, we get a 50-50 mixture. Half the time we come this way, half the time we come the other way. If you draw them out carefully, what you find is that in many cases, specifically in the cases where we can form chirality centers because we don't have two hydrogens on both ends of the diene. Okay, we have at least one substituent that's different on the end of the diene. In that case, we form mirror images that are not superposable. Those would be enantiomers. Now, I find it easiest then, when doing a Diels-Alder predict the product reaction, to draw the first product, which I'm going to show you how to do that in problem solving next week. We draw the first product, I drop a mirror next to it, and then I just reflect this product side by side across the mirror. We could also do it by flipping dashes and wedges. That's not incorrect. I just find that harder to see. So I call this the side-by-side mirror image. And we are going to try as much as possible when required to draw mirror images to draw these side-by-side mirror images. Again, in our homework system, it might not always do this. And so we'll just have to kind of fight our way through. Sometimes it won't be consistent.